So, all right. Hi, everybody. Thanks for being here and joining us today for a Friends from the Field webinar. This one is called All About Sharks, which seems like it's a pretty pertinent topic right now. My name is Marin Brock, and I'm the Outreach Coordinator for Blue Hill Heritage Trust. These webinars are co-hosted with Island Heritage Trust, so we also have Noelle from Island Heritage Trust on the panel today. And before we begin, I wanted to say that we've been doing these webinars for a few years now, and if you're interested in looking at past webinar archives, you can find them on our website or on our YouTube channel. All of our webinars and online resources are free and open to the public, and every person is welcome to attend and take advantage of these learning opportunities. So if you appreciate the work we do and are interested in making a donation or contributing to our work, then you can donate on our website. And if you are already a donor, then thank you for your support. Our next webinar is going to be titled Seaweed, a Vital Resource and Habitat, and that's going to be on October 24th. All right, so now I am going to pass over to Noelle, who will talk about some housekeeping and logistics, and then I will introduce our speaker.
Hello, everyone. If any questions come up for you in the middle of Charlie's presentation, feel free to use the Q&A feature that you'll see on the bottom of your screen. Just type your questions in real time, and then I have a little assistant here. And then we will field them all at the end of Charlie's presentation.
All right, great. Thank you, Noelle. So for today's webinar, we are lucky enough to be joined by Dr. Charlie Rolsky, who is the Executive Director of the Shaw Institute in Blue Hill, Maine. Charlie received his master's and PhD from Arizona State University's Biodesign Institute, where he researched plastic pollution in marine and terrestrial ecosystems. As a postdoctoral research scholar in the Biodesign's Center for Sustainable Macromolecular Materials and Manufacturing, he focused on green chemistry and sustainable materials science. Charlie and his research have been featured on ABC News and PBS, and in the pages of the New York Times, Newsweek, Washington Post, Forbes, Smithsonian Magazine, and many other media outlets. Currently, he focuses on research links between environmental contamination and human health, which includes plastic pollution, PFAS chemicals, and other contaminants of concern. Charlie is extremely passionate about citizen science and public outreach, with groups ranging from kids to lifelong learners. A teacher for over 8 years, he continues his mentorship through a range of internship and educational opportunities at the Shaw Institute. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Charlie.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here. I should probably give you a shorter bio in the future. Can you see my screen? Is it full screen? Are we good?
It is not full screen.
It is not full screen. All right. I was afraid of that. Let me see here. Give me just a sec. Let me try one more thing. I just want to make sure it presents the right way. Let's just try this real quick. That's not right. How about this? Is this any better?
The one you just did was right. The one you just had was full screen for a second.
Perfect. Okay, we'll do that one. All right, great. Well, thank you very much. It's great to be here talking about sharks. I always like to talk about sharks. It's a good thing. My name is Charlie. I've worked on a lot of different interesting projects, from field work with killer whale poop to then working on plastic as a material, trying to figure out why it impacts what it impacts and if we can actually do anything about it. The shark thing does hit close to home because when I was in Arizona, being a younger scientist, I was told to take any collaborative opportunity seriously. And so I went to the state capitol to talk to legislators dressed as a shark. So been a shark inside for a long time. And been a lot of really cool promotional things about the ocean, and a lot of different outreach opportunities have come my way. So I'm always grateful for those. So thank you again, IHT and BHHT, for having me. I like to talk about science as being kind of nerdy, but here's me an Aquaman having a good time. Very muscular, but this is always fun to show, especially kids, because the scientists have a certain perception, and when you can be different than that, that's always a big win. So I lead the Shaw Institute. We're a nonprofit research center in Blue Hill. We focus on a lot of things from field work to contaminant monitoring in animals and humans. And we kind of convey that in a lot of different ways through research or through outreach and education and beach cleanups. We're actively growing as an organization, and we're always really, really grateful and lucky to partner with organizations like we're partnering with tonight. It's a wonderful peninsula full of a lot of life, and it's great that we can all work together to promote that. I like to talk briefly about the lab that first got me into science, and that his name was Tucker. Tucker started one of my sort of research affinities with the ocean. We utilized Tucker to work with killer whales, and it was a beautiful partnership that I am very grateful for to this day. But I like to always give a nod to Tucker whenever I give a talk. And Tucker and I worked on trying to get better protection for an endangered group of killer whales off the Pacific coast. And he was a really wonderful dog. It was a completely non-invasive research experience, which was really fun. So I really am grateful for his, his constant guidance. He's no longer with us, but he's still very much with me. And that's where I sort of got not only my connection with the ocean, but started finding things in samples that shouldn't be there. And so these vials represented a marine mammal fecal sample that had something hard in it that just didn't feel like a fish scale or anything like that, and ended up being a plastic, which started my grad school journey into the space. So it's always great to go into plastic, but back to the ocean, which is where I feel I belong. But we're here to talk about sharks. Sharks are very cool. We're introduced to sharks at a very young age. And to start with kind of the bare, I shouldn't say bare bones, I should bare cartilage. Basically, the definition of a shark is having that cartilaginous skeleton that makes it different from other bony fish. Traditionally, they have 5 to 7 gill slits on the side, and these are very specific definitions. So, kind of attacking the sciencey part first. They also have pec fins that are not fused to the head. Now, it tends to be a pretty specific group of animals, and if I can use my laser here, we had sort of a shared ancestor back in the day that ended up branching out into sort of bony fishes and then the cartilaginous fishes. And generally, when we group the animals together, we'll do it based on whether it's sharks and rays or whether it's bony fishes. And we have the sharks and rays kind of shared ancestor back here around the time of the Chimera. And it's a really cool group of organisms that, even though they share similar structures, appendages, ways that they interact with the ocean, there's a lot of differences between them. And when I started to look more into sort of the evolutionary relationships between the species, it really does help to explain why sharks are such incredible hunters, that have lasted for a very long time. How long? Well, sharks have been around since about 400 million years ago, which is a very long time. We would make a joke in my family that's older than my grandmother, and it's true, kind of. She might have been around. But because they've been around for so long, they've actually survived 5 mass extinctions, which is really, really impressive. But it just goes to show, kind of in nature, if things tend to not change dramatically or disappear, they're really well suited for what they're a part of. And it's one of the more impressive groups of animals that's ever existed on the planet. So it's always a fun thing for me to talk about them. Scientists have a really specific way of identifying certain shark species and even grouping them together by genus or family. And they'll apply these to different groups of animals, again, based on how they look, how they behave. Even something that's called a nictitating eyelid, which is something sharks have an extra eyelid that'll close. If it's something that's generally attacking, something live that could fight back, they want to protect the eye. So, really dramatic great white shark shots at slow-mo. When you see that eyelid come, that's what they're referring to. So this is something that scientists have really been able to explore a lot of. And it's a tough thing to do because the ocean is difficult to study. We rely a lot on the fossil record in something that's not always going to be preserved on land. In some instances, we can find a megalodon tooth here or there on land, but the ocean is a tough place to study. So the fact that scientists were able to put this together is very interesting, and it does say a lot about this group of animals. Now, we like to talk about the Triassic period when it comes to sharks, if we go back in time. And some people call it the Triassic period, but scientists like to refer to that as the nature smoking something period when it comes to sharks, because we had some really crazy stuff going on back then. This was thought to be one of the first species of sharks, the smooth-scaled shark. and very, very interesting looking animal. We had one called the anvil shark, which also is very unique looking. And you might think that these are made up, and I would understand that, but it's based on the fossil record. We had the sawtooth shark and then the whirl shark, all very dramatic looking animals and all very strange and happened around this time period, give or take. This is why we sort of refer to it as a nature smoking something period, because what are these? But sure enough, there's indications in the fossil record that animals like this actually existed, which is really cool to think about, kind of like super shark species. And again, very trippy fossil record. I would have liked to have been on the team of archaeologists or scientists that were able to find these, because they probably would have been blown away by it. But again, these are based on things that were discovered later on. It's an interpretation of it. So maybe it didn't look this dramatic or this, however adjective you want to use for the artist rendering, but it was still a very interesting time in their kind of chronological evolution over the years. But that's not to say that we also don't have a lot of interesting species now. Animals like the megamouth shark. This is actually one of the smaller groups related to filter feeding sharks that we'll talk about in a little bit. The goblin shark, which is horrifying, but also really cool. They tend to capture like the worst images of this shark. And maybe that's just like a really innocent smile, and that's just their smile, and they look beautiful that way. But again, very dramatic looking animal with a longer kind of extension of its face that's actually very similar to hammerhead sharks. So you've seen that really dramatic long head that they use for sensory reasons to find things in the sand. The goblin shark's very similar. I forget the name of this one. I only know the nickname of devil shark. This is something that will extend its entire mouth to be able to grab onto something. You also have the Greenland shark. This is considered to be the oldest vertebrate on the planet. Scientists think that there's one swimming around that's over 400 years old, which is really amazing, but not at the same time when you think about how the cold preserves things. It's a pretty ridiculous accomplishment nonetheless, and it's amazing to think about when the shark was born, what was happening at that time. You also have the frilled shark. This is another one that actually, it's a deep sea animal that looks like an eel when it swims. And then the cookie cutter shark, which is a very cool animal. They have the biggest tooth to body ratio of all the sharks. And it's actually thought that they've brought down some submarines by attaching onto them, cutting a side with their teeth, causing a breach. I don't know how true that is. I like to think it is. But either way, despite the nature smoking something period, we still have some really cool animals alive with us today. Now, sharks, we have about 530 species. It depends on what you classify as a shark. Sometimes it could be more than that, depends on the classification, but we around 500 species today. Of those, 121 are endangered, 90 are critically endangered, and 180 are vulnerable, which means about 30% or a third of them are threatened with extinction. And it's not a massive surprise. We know there's a lot of animals on the planet right now that aren't doing so well, especially in the ocean. And so it's a sad statistic, but empowering, knowing that we can figure this out and try to help it in our own ways. And when we question to try to figure that out, I understand it from a marine mammal perspective. That's what I worked on. It's always interesting for me to dive into a completely different species and try to figure out if the similar threats are the reason why they're not doing so well, or is it different than what we've experienced with our marine mammals, even off the coast of Maine here. So one of the first prominent threats to these animals is bycatch. And bycatch is just incidental take of something you didn't mean to get. A lot of the shark species, they are kind of built in such a way that they have to have water flowing continuously throughout their lung system. There are some species that don't need that. But if they get stuck in something like this, then it ends up really leading to a quick mortality that's probably not without suffering. So it's a really sad state kind of sharks today. I don't mean to vilify any particular industry when I'm talking about this. I'm just sort of identifying what's been happening with species around the world in hopes that we can come up with some measures that would make it so that this doesn't happen as often. Now, besides that, we know that the global shark fin market is massive. It's another sad state of affairs when it comes to these animals. I didn't want to show some of the pictures. I'm sure you've seen them before. It's really difficult to watch, completely unnecessary, and it's just something that is really sad. And when I say unnecessary, I just mean anyone that's chopping off the fins and throwing it back in the ocean. It's a really sad thing to see. And sort of getting to the crux of that, of why it happens, why the fins. It's a really interesting kind of education on different cultures and different belief systems, which are all valid, but we just need to figure out what's going to be best for these animals moving forward, because we want them to keep, they've been here for 400 million years. We want them to last another, 400 million. They're also hunted for their cartilage. So we know that the meat and fins are consumed. The skin can be turned into leather, unfortunately, but there's also certain sources of cosmetics and vitamins that specifically point out shark being in them. And it's very similar to the endangered species trade in that we see a lot of parts of different animals end up in medicines. And it's a really sad, again, it's a sad reminder that despite the fact that these are very much, dinosaurs, they're facing a plethora of threats on a contemporary basis that have probably never happened ever. And I hope that they can remain intact enough to be able to withstand it. But again, I'm glad we're able to talk about it, shed light on it, in hopes that we can create sort of a better ocean, for them. And some honorable mentions are, pollution, change of habitat, loss of habitat, coastal development, climate change. These are all things that also affect the sharks. But when scientists specifically zoom in on why the numbers are low with certain species, these are the biggest indicators of that decimation of certain species. Now, why is this a big deal? When people think about sharks, they sort of think about how they're portrayed, especially in the media, as these eating machines that go around and attack people. And there's not really a lot about the benefit that they provide to the planet, which I find to be really unfortunate. When I was a kid, I was all into Shark Week. Of course, it's cool. Any nature show that talks about sharks, usually awesome. But very little is focused on the benefit that they provide to the planet. Meanwhile, they use a lot of these sort of scare tactics to get people to watch. And I'll talk about that a little bit later. But speaking to the benefits that they provide to the planet, they contribute to the health of the respective ecosystem in many ways. One of the leading ones is just controlling herbivores. If you have too many herbivores, they'll decimate all the plants. It'll throw off kind of the balance of that ecosystem. They also will stop the overgrazing that's done by animals like sea turtles. I know we all love sea turtles, but if there's too many of them, there won't be enough plants. They're very charismatic, but again, the sharks kind of keep that in check by allowing there to be a lot more of a uniform distribution of marine vegetation, which is really critical to these ecosystems. And they also will hunt these herbivorous fish, which normally might go about their daily routines in one way or another, but relatively slowly. But if they can cause these grazing fish to spread out and really spread the foraging activity and make sure there's not too many grazing fish, that's a huge advantage to that respective ecosystem. And it's a wonderful service that sharks provide while they fill their bellies up. And they also travel really far across their lifetimes. I'll show you an example in a little bit. And again, this is the redistribution of nutrients. It's a fancy way for saying that they poop a lot, which is great. Whale poop is an incredible thing for the ecosystem, as is shark poop. It allows a lot of smaller animals to flourish, and that moves up the food chain, providing a lot of energy to the rest of the animals there. And usually ecosystems that have healthy shark populations are more productive and flourish compared to those without. And that kind of goes without saying with the prior 4 points made above that. The more sharks you have in the ecosystem, the more healthy it's going to be, and the better it is for the ecosystem as a whole. Sylvia Earle had a great quote. You shouldn't be afraid if you see sharks. Be afraid if you don't see sharks. Now, one of the questions I get very often, us at the Shaw Institute, is, are there sharks in Blue Hill Bay? And certainly, we know that there is one that hangs around. That's Charlie the shark. He's pretty harmless, unless there's a lobster roll around or some steamed clams. Those are in trouble. We will redistribute that material. That shark will do it. But generally, he likes to read books dressed as a shark to kids. Sometimes he'll read books on the water to kids. It's a pretty safe, benign shark. But there's definitely one confirmed in Blue Hill. Other than that, when people come in and they want to know from us if it's safe to swim, we put on a much nicer face, but what's going on in our head is kind of like a mixture of all of these things. We generally don't know. The ocean's a big place. There's a lot of food out there, and it's hard for us to say either way if there's a shark out there. But what we can do is look at sort of historical patterns of where sharks have been and where they're traveling to, where they've come, where they've gone. Obviously, when everyone thinks about a shark, their minds go to a great white shark. Certainly, there's been viewings of sharks around Maine and up into Canada, even farther south. We know how much they love Cape Cod. We don't see them commonly. There's not a defined reason why we might not. The water tends to be a little bit more murky. They have this amazing ability to sense things on the side of their faces. It's called the ampullae of Lorenzini, which normally I would have this presentation in presenter mode, but I don't right now. It didn't work. So I'm glad I remembered that. But that sensory system allows them to detect things in the water, movement, heat patterns. It's a pretty incredible hunting strategy. And so if there's a lot of stuff in the water, if it's murky, if it's too shallow, it's going to kind of interfere with their ability to hunt. Great white sharks are pretty incredible animals. You'll notice that it's gray on the top and white on the bottom, which means if you're below the shark and you look up, the white belly kind of blends in with the sunlight. And if you're above it, then the gray back blends in with the darkness below it. So it's really an incredible animal. But again, seeing them, it's pretty rare. It's a kind of a tough thing to predict. When I got my scuba certification, I remember asking the dive instructor, because he would dive all over the place. He's the head of the police diving force. I would ask him, have you ever seen this? Have you ever seen that? And he would say, I might have here and there, but they were there. I just didn't see them. He's like, every time you're in the water in certain areas, they're going to be there. It's just, they kind of eyeball you and for the most part want to stay away. So it's great that they're in the water. I would love for them to be there. It means that it's a healthy ecosystem. Obviously, we have to take precautions, but great whites are definitely an animal that hang out quite a bit again towards Cape Cod, but they're in the area. We have a lot of other shark species that will frequent our waters, sometimes often, sometimes not at all, but they're around. Spiny dogfish, blue shark, mako, sand tiger is the one that it's kind of like the goblin, where it's tough to get a non-toothy picture. Poor beagles are probably the most charismatic shark species. That one's just looking like it thought you said its name, and it's like me. And then the thresher shark is really beautiful, really amazing animal that we had thought we spotted at one point. One I forgot to mention that I'm sure everyone in Blue Hill is now familiar with. This is a basking shark. It's funny, if you ever see people post things on Facebook or wherever that say they saw a great white shark and it's somewhere in our area, 9 times out of 10, it's either one of these or maybe it's a sunfish. But I've gotten a lot of videos where people say it's a shark, but it technically is probably a basking shark, not a great white. They have huge gaping mouths, but they eat some of the smallest organisms, small shrimp, fish, krill. They're incredible to see. And we had one, unfortunately, visit us too close. This was a video that we were sent by some friends of ours. I think it was in Blue Hill. Yeah, it was in Blue Hill. There's been multiple strange sightings this year with humpbacks and now the basking shark. But obviously, this is an animal in distress. We don't like to see it. The tail, it was thought it could be a thresher shark, but based on the fin size, the distribution, the size of the animal, and then the size of the fin, we kind of concluded it probably wasn't. Now, in this scenario, we just hope that it's not there the next day. The tide might be coming in, it might be going back out. And our hope was that we found out the next day that nothing was there. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case. We had a basking shark that washed ashore in Blue Hill, and it was a really beautiful animal. It was really sad for us to see this, because obviously you want to see this animal flourishing in the ocean and not wash ashore like this. Now, this is a 20-foot basking shark. It's pretty big. I think full grown, they can get to be about 40 feet. They're a really, really incredible animal. I think over the course of an hour, actually, I'm skipping ahead now. I'm not going to say that. But we responded to this with a nonprofit that we work with out of Bar Harbor and tried to salvage what we could. Now, when anything on the ocean passes away, it's always really sad. But the wealth of information within the animal itself has a story to tell about the ecosystem, and more importantly, the health of the ecosystem. A lot of things that are in the water concentrate, especially in top tier species. And so the farther up the food chain it goes, the more concentrated that contaminant might be. So in this situation, whether it's a seal or a porpoise or a shark, we're going to want to zoom in on the filtration organs. So kidney, liver, spleen. Sharks like this have huge livers. They don't have a lot of fat. A lot of the fat's in the liver, which helps to retain buoyancy in the water. Thankfully, it doesn't smell that bad in that case. Marine mammals actually smell a lot worse. But it was a response that we had pretty much right away to make sure we could get on scene, be an assistance to the other groups and try to figure out if we could get to the bottom of why this animal passed away. So the Shaw Institute responded really quickly, and we were one of the first on scene. I apologize for the graphic imagery. I tried to make it smaller. It is really a beautiful animal. And so we started working really hard on being able to process what we could. This is an area where the tide was coming in really quickly. And so we had to act with haste. Now, a good chunk into this, we received a call from NOAA who said that this shark is a protected species because they're threatened, which is valid. We don't technically really work with sharks that often, so we don't have the permitting to be able to work with them. And so we basically, we all stopped, we put our stuff away, we started to pack up and leave. And then NOAA called back and said, well, while you're there, you know, could you get us some samples? And so, yeah, sure, why not? We're here. We can be good collaborators. And so we did. And what they specifically wanted were some vertebrae samples and then some sample of brain tissue, which is going to help kind of tell us if this animal was healthy, if it was disoriented, if it was sick. Now, the vertebrae you can see on the far right picture, they're not small. And 5 vertebrae together in that middle picture, you can see our interns and Emma on the left there try to bag it and put it into a cart that we had to wheel up into a truck. It was quite the process. These are large animals. And again, we were just really invested on how we can try to figure out what happened to this animal. We don't know specifically what's going to happen with the samples. Now, this was us cleaning up on the left. I had to buy a lot of bags of ice on the right, and we had to turn the lab in the downstairs of Shaw Institute into like a bone triage. So we had filled up all of our sinks with ice. We had kept samples on the ice so that we could wait for NOAA to make the transport drop and be able to give them the samples that they requested. I hope we find out what happened to this shark, because we certainly put a lot of time and resources into it, but I'm not going to hold my breath because, you know, I'm glad I'm having tea and not a beer, because maybe I would spill more. It's okay. It was a wonderfully collaborative experience. Our interns, it was a once in a lifetime thing to be a part of. You never know with interns, like, hey, do you want to go out today and cut open a basking shark, you know, all day? And they were really into it. It was an amazing example to them about how we can understand the health of the ecosystem based on something that happened that was a little bit more on the tragic side. But all in all, it was a really unique experience. And these animals are really amazing to learn about and to think about. So all in all, again, it was a really great experience. Now, you can use tracking apps such as this one provided by OSearch. The data is not always the most recent, but they sort of rely on pings. It's a shark conservation group that will actually implant tracking devices, and it sounds a little bit rough, but a lot of groups do it, including NOAA. This was a snapshot that I took kind of in the Gulf of Maine. It's definitely showing some shark activity towards Cape Cod, but just well-distributed sharks kind of all around the Gulf of Maine. This was Hallie, who was a great white shark that had traveled pretty far around the area. You can see Portland there. If I get my little fancy laser pointer, Portland's right here. Bangor's here, so we're right in the middle. She wasn't too far off the coast. A lot of the species that I mentioned earlier, those shark species, they'll be up in Canadian waters, and then we'll come down looking for food or looking for, usually it's food. This was a blue shark. I forget the blue shark's name, but again, here's Portland right here. So not too far away off the coast there of Maine. And it's cool for us to see. It's a healthy ecosystem supporting healthy animals. That's a big win for all of us. Now, back to the basking shark. This is the second largest fish in the world to the, does anyone want to say it? Can't hear you say whale shark, but if that's what it was, great. 5 points. They spend a lot of their time near the surface. The visibility is good. A lot of the animals that they're trying to eat spend their time on the surface. And that does provide an opportunity for something more negative to happen. And so one of the first things that we did actually when we got on scene was to check the body and make sure that there weren't any propeller strikes or something along those lines. And there wasn't anything that jumped out right away. We didn't see any obvious wounds, but it's a good kind of example to provide again that's, you know, we sometimes try to help situations by getting in there, towing the animal out, which is all well and good. Just remember that boats have propellers. We have to make sure that we're aware of the shark's movement and behavioral patterns so that if we need to switch off the prop, we can quickly. But it's a beautiful animal. They can actually breach the water, which is a sight I haven't seen before, but I'd like to look up a video of it. This statistic kind of blew my mind, but they can filter 4 million pounds of water every hour while feeding. That is a lot of water. They live to be about 50. Females have a 3-year gestation period, which is very long. And that's why it's always, this is why the animal's protected. If you lose one that's carrying, it's just dramatic loss for the species. But we're hoping to get to the bottom of why it passed. My honest opinion is that it was hunting in shallow water with poor visibility. Tide was going out, and we just had a bad situation, but hopefully we find out more. One of the questions we get is, can it be sustainable to eat sharks? And for better or for worse, it can be. Just like any wild stock of animal, if scientists notice that a wild stock is being kind of hit in such a way that might not be sustainable, they can introduce a sort of farming strategy to take the dependency off the wild stock. Now, this doesn't mean with all sharks, only some of them. So an example of that is the spiny dogfish, which I showed a picture of earlier. The spiny dogfish, they're actually the largest fisheries in the US, and it's a really well-run facility. It's in the purple there on that map. So you can see that we do have a relationship with it being in Maine, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, and so on. But it's actually, the quote is that Atlantic spiny dogfish is a smart seafood choice. It's sustainably managed and responsibly harvested. That's not to say that, again, you should go out and just kill sharks or eat sharks, but there are sustainable management strategies that are implemented with certain shark species to lessen the dependency on the wild stocks. So it is something that's being monitored. I have friends and colleagues that work in this field. It's something that we can have a lot more optimism about moving forward. Now, I always like to browse the media when it comes to sharks, because there's always kind of an interesting dynamic between our understanding of them and their actual behaviors. I had presented on this many years ago, and I kind of hope that things have changed since then, but I always like to show headlines like this. For example, the second one down, that great white sharks are gathering off the coast of the Carolinas, which is like, ooh, what are they doing? Or 2 giant sharks lurking off South Carolina coast, lurking off South Carolina coast. It just conveys like this, they're out to get me kind of thing, which I find to be really interesting. And I don't really know why. If you go to any animal's habitat and it's there, it's just there. It's not lurking, it's not creeping, it's not gathering, it's just living in its respective ecosystem. This was posted today. This was actually in my mailbox this morning when I was at work, that there were shark sightings off this area, and it caught researchers off guard because sharks were in the ocean, because they shouldn't be there. Now, if sharks were in the Shaw Institute, I would say, okay, who's my competition? But in the ocean, I don't really get it. So I like to think about other predators that have that kind of allure, right? So lions. We talk about lions in Africa. Like that's not strange. If someone goes to Africa and they're in the Serengeti and they get off on the cart and there's a lion, is it lurking? Is it weird? It's like, no, it's where it lives. It lives there. But for some reason, we're more comfortable with it because it's on land and we can see it. Whereas if it's this mystery and it's deep and we're not used to going in water, now it's lurking and being all shady. So I did a kind of browsing of the headlines with lions. Yeah, we have some lions rescued. We have some lions making a record-breaking swim for female affection. And a lion cub is safe, Freya. They're going to end captive lion breeding. That's great. Super predator. One animal in Africa instills even more fear than lions. That's actually humans. So I do respect that article. But again, I'm just kind of like, why does the lion get free reign of Africa, and yet the sharks in the ocean, it's a problem? I just don't really understand this, but I'd like to. And quickly, there's some other really dramatic shows we like to put on during Shark Week. And again, not vilifying Shark Week. It's cool, but they could be a little better. The boldest bite. So let's look at some of these words. The word exercise. Intense encounters with sharks. Savage great white shark, which is savage is actually a good word now. So maybe it's a compliment, came full circle, but not at the time. 7 scariest shark encounters. And these have quite a few views. Terrifying close calls with sharks. Again, if you're sitting on a golf cart in the Serengeti and a lion bites the cart, whose fault is that? Here's another one, Shark Week. We talked a lot about Shark Week. That second one I really like. Sharks have a sixth sense that's tuned to kill. You know what else is tuned to kill? Otters. Otters are tuned to kill, but are also very cute. So I don't know why we don't have like Otter Week, monster otters. Killer otters. Let's look at some of these shows. Monster Tag, Air Jaws, The Hunted. Great white shark serial killer lives or lives. Could be one, could be the other. Serial killers. So they kill consecutively because they're predators, like a lot of other animals that are also predators. Coyotes. Are they serial killers? Great hammerhead invasion. So hammerheads, which live in the ocean and are found in the ocean, somehow invaded the ocean. Devil sharks. Now we're just really getting biblical with it. Here's a show that I want to pay special attention to. This person reenacted a boat crashing and didn't have any food or water or sleep. And the physical condition of the person deteriorated, and the shark attack rises. How will the sharks behave when a man who's floating and looks like a hurt seal is in the water near them? It's not like we're painting these animals out to be horrible or anything. So this is cool. And again, the poster children for the ocean being scary. That's kind of what my thought is. But then at the very end, the very bottom, these groups are teaming up to save our sharks from working with other major brands to help raise money, activating shark tagging trips, and developing content to educate fans on the importance of sharks in our ecosystem. Because we all know that serial killers and devils are very important to the planet. I had to find this at the very bottom of where they were talking about this. And for any of you people out there that watch The Office, there's a part of it where the boss is talking to the receptionist and is really mean to her at this event. And then the receptionist walks away and the boss says, "I would never say this to her face, but she is a wonderful person and a gifted artist." And then another coworker says, "Why wouldn't you say that to her face?" And for me, it's like, why wouldn't you put that at the top? How about sharks are being finned, or sharks end up in bycatch, or shark species are threatened, a third of the species are threatened? This is why they're cool. I mean, you can still show that they're cool. They are cool. But like the graphic, bloody teeth, and they have pink gums, like props for them. It's healthy, but just this is very dramatic and scary. I just wish they'd rearrange like the whole order of things and maybe start with the fact that sharks are important, because I'd love to watch a TV show about how they poop and it makes the ecosystem happy. That would be a very cool thing, but they're not listening to me. So I checked last week's, and sure enough, Belly of the Beast, serial killer. They still are on the serial killer thing. There's a lot of animals that are serial killers. Alien sharks, so now they're coming from a different planet. Raiders of the Lost Shark, probably the best title they have there. Monster Hammerhead's Killer Instinct. I mean, isn't a Venus flytrap a killer? Okay. Monster Mako Fresh Blood, because they would really want to eat old blood. Discovery. Shark versus Snake, Tropic Jaws, Haunting of Shark Tower. Mega Sharks of Dangerous Reef. I've been trying to get an audience with these folks for many years now. I can see why they don't want to talk to me, but it's still kind of frustrating. So they are the deadliest animals, and deservedly are called serial killers and devils. Let's talk about, oh, look at that. I have an otter on my cup. Speaking of serial killer animals, whatever, they're cute, so it's fine. Let's talk about the deadliest animals in the world. Wolves. They kill on average, this changes, 10 people a year worldwide. Elephants, 100. Lions, 100. Hippos, 500. You think lions are scary? Hippos are scarier, but cute too. Alligators, crocodiles, 1,000 people. Snakes, 2,500. Parasites, insects, whatnot, 10,000. I guess not parasites. Insects, snails, 10,000 people. Dogs, 25,000 people. Dogs. Snakes, 50,000 people. Humans, 500,000 people. That's probably a lot more since then. And sharks, the #1 deadliest animal at mosquitoes, 725,000 people a year. That seems pretty serial killer to me. Sharks, 10 people. So that title, Monster Devil Serial Killer, very fitting for the shark in comparison to all the other animals. Dogs, 25,000. So yeah, they definitely earned the title. And yeah, this is a slightly frustrating for me to talk about, but I'm glad to have this conversation. How can we help sharks on a positive note? Well, the first thing I'd like for you to take away from this are the benefits that sharks provide to the ecosystem. That way, If someone says to you, guess what? I heard a shark was spotted off Portland, you can say, guess what? That's a good thing. Hopefully they poop. It's a great thing to have sharks there. It means there's food. It means they're comfortable. There's visibility. It's awesome. It means they're chasing the herbivores or they're reducing the herbivore number, helping the ecosystem as a whole. We just had a beach cleanup. You can think about the gaping mouth of the basking shark if you have a lot of trash floating in the ocean. For them, for the megamouth, for the whale shark, that's a big deal. It can get stuck if it's small plastics and get stuck in their body. Our beach cleanup was very successful. We probably pulled around 40 pounds or if not more worth of trash, mostly plastic, out of the ocean. That's a good thing to help them because what comes onto the beach can go back into the ocean. It's a good thing. Be aware of where your food comes from. There's some groups that will sort of say something is flake, but actually they mean shark. And then again, we know some shark species are sustainable, but a lot of them are not. So it's good to figure out where your seafood comes from and to make sure things like tuna are coming from an area that are very shark friendly. Again, when you're on the boat, if you're fishing, joyriding, and you start to see a fin, cut the engine and just sort of be there with it. Watch out, it doesn't get hit. Don't get too close. And if you see something, report it to the authorities. It's always good. It's so that any of us know that there's something in the water that we can sort of pay special attention to. Why? I mean, this is an obvious one. There's a lot of information online about things to avoid because they are derived from shark. And again, it might not be the sharks that are okay to take from. This looks like a black tip shark. Not great. Definitely avoid those. And then I know there's a lot of joy that goes around like trophy hunting and things like that. This is a very stressful event for the animal. So if you're going to do one of these things, I would hope it's with a species that at least is not threatened or endangered. Or, you know, maybe these guys are helping it get back in the water. That's how I tell myself. They're just helping a beach shark get back in the water and they're not beach fishing. But either way, let's just take animals that are okay to take and leave the other ones alone. That's always a good situation to be in. And the biggest thing that you can do is just empower yourself. Be an entrepreneur of science, as E.O. Wilson says. Figure out what sharks are in your area. What's the biggest threat in the area? How can you help? Beyond what I'm saying, educate yourself on all of those really great things. I would say, again, with anything, avoid the really extremist points of view. And an example might be, well, ban fishing because sharks get stuck in bycatch. Banning something like that is not going to really help things. But what we can do is work towards reducing bycatch, and that's always a good thing. Definitely follow the science and data that supports certain types, or evidence that supports certain type of data. That's a really good thing. That's what we like to see as scientists. And then trust the experts. So we always defer to shark scientists. Even me, when this whole thing went down, not having a lot of experience with sharks, I definitely deferred to those that had more experience with sharks because that's what you do. It's a good thing. But that said, I think for the first time in the history of my life, I'm about to finish on time. One of the things I wanted to kind of bring up as a plug for us is we're actually working with OSERCH to potentially create a research program. Sharks are kind of understudied when it comes to plastic pollution, which is our background at Shaw Institute. This picture of the killer whale below is definitely horrifying. And we kind of we don't like unknowns in science. I'd like to know that there's not really a big threat from plastic pollution when it comes to sharks. So it's something that we've taken on. We've got a brand new instrument in Blue Hill that we've gotten up and running as our new technician, Jack. This allows us to understand the mass of things like plastics within a given tissue. It also it helps us to understand contaminants that they might bring along or chemicals like additives. So that's something we're going to be using. That's our new building that we've moved into. And then all of the science that I talked about today, especially as it relates to plastics, is going to be integrated into our new education building, which is going to live in downtown Blue Hill. We just started this process very recently, and we're excited for the road ahead. Anytime we can take science and turn it into something tangible for people that empowers them to make positive decisions, it's a win for us. So that said, I finished a minute early, but I'm happy to take any questions as long as I know the answer. If I don't, I'll say that too. But thank you very much for listening and for your time. Hi, Mom and Dad.
Wow. Thanks, Charlie. That was a
Sure.
cool presentation. That was
Thank
awesome.
you.
Yeah. So folks, if you have any questions, feel free to put them into the question box down below. When we have one, it looks like we've got one in there right now. And that John asks, why do you show two different numbers for numbers killed from snakes?
Did I show two different numbers from snakes? I might have. Let me double check what I had there. That's a really good point. Actually, you know what? That's a great point. 2,500, the lower one, is a parasite. It just looks like a snake. 50,000 is a snake. Thank you, John, for that eye. 2,500, they should make the parasite smaller. That's like ringworm or something. 50,000 is a snake. Great catch. John's on it.
Great. Awesome. I have a quick question for you.
Sure.
Let's ask one. What is the population? Do you know what the population numbers are for basking sharks, just in general? Like how
In
many?
this area, I don't. It's tough when they have different populations in different locations. All I know is that their numbers are in such a way that they are considered a threatened species. So it means that they're within a certain range for that organism. But I'm not sure what the species number is or the population is out here.
Cool.
That's a good question. Sweet.
Well, it looks like we don't have any more questions. So
Good. That's a good thing. I'll
great.
take it.
Yeah. Oh wait. Oh, there's a few more in the chat box.
Okay.
What is your favorite shark from Emma?
Of course. Should ask that. My favorite shark is all shark. No. I would say my favorite shark is the hammerhead shark because that's just such an incredible adaptive way to find animals. And again, they're painted as killers, but their mouths are teeny tiny, so they're really eating small animals. They're not really that scary, but they are really cool. And that's kind of that like nature smoking time, but it's currently. So I would say hammerhead shark is my favorite shark.
Jay asks, what are the uses of sharks that are being fished in the Gulf of Maine? Good, or probably meant to say food or other products?
But to my knowledge, a lot of it is food based or it's used for fishing. But that's a good question. I'm not actually sure. I just was researching if we had any sustainable fisheries in the area. As far as I know, it's food, but there might be other uses for it. It's a good question.
Awesome. Well,
Sweet.
questions. Once again, thank you so much for your time. That was super informative. And for folks that are still on here, this webinar is recorded. And after this, I'm going to upload it to our YouTube channel. So if you guys want to watch it again or share it with anyone, it will be on there.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Charlie.
Have a good one.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.